Hello friends, today I am going to be doing something a little different. Today we're going to get a bit more into comparative religion because I've noticed there tend to be a lot of arguments about gifts of the spirit versus spiritual gifts in terms of non-Christian discussion. What I've found, there's actually a lot of overlap in my personal experience. So we're gonna take it from there. Be aware, a lot of this is going to be coming straight out of scriptures, specifically the New Testament and specific scriptures from the LDS Church, because that's where I was raised, so that's where I received a lot of these teachings first. Okay. So, as I said, this is going to be kind of scripturally dense because I've learned it's best to actually share the sources when you are talking about certain types of potentially conflicting information. So I am coming at this from the perspective of someone who was born and raised in the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and someone who has spent the last several years studying a wide variety of pagan practices and as a Reiki master. So I am drawing from sources from all over the world that I have learned in regards to this topic of spiritual gifts. Because I have noticed Christians love to talk about gifts of the Spirit and then are afraid to use them. Where the non-Christian denominations don't call them gifts of the Spirit or gifts from God, but they're talking about the same things. So, we're going to run down some of these descriptions in the Bible of what spiritual gifts are, and then I will give examples of how I have witnessed them used by non-Christians. Because in Corinthians, once I find my proper bookmark, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 7, it says, "But every man has his proper gift of God, one after this manner and another after that." Everyone has gifts. Everyone has spiritual abilities. The question is, are they developing them? Are they using them? This is something that is also encouraged from the Bible in 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 4, verse 14. "Neglect not the gift that is in thee, which was given thee by prophecy." So not only do we all have gifts, we're not supposed to deny them. We're not supposed to ignore them. At least as described in the New Testament in these two verses. We're also told in John 11, verse 22, "But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee." We're told to ask for spiritual gifts. If it is something that we need in our life, we're straight up told, ask for it. So I'm now going to take a little segue into Crossroads of Conjure, written by Katrina Rasbold. Because first off, I learned a great deal from her, and I have studied with her on and off for the last close to 5 years. And she's an expert on a lot of these things. So I'm going to read a little excerpt from her book, Crossroads of Conjure, page 107, which is in the section on Appalachian Granny Magic. Within Granny Magic, there are 4 primary types of practitioners: granny doctors, goomer doctors, seers, and water witches. Skipping down a little bit, none of these 4 types of workers possessed powers themselves. Their abilities were bestowed upon them through the grace of God, and they acted as channels for God's power. Much like the root, the herb, the branch, or any other item used in folk medicine, healers in the Scotch-Irish traditions considered themselves natural tools to enact God's will on earth. I see the exact same thing in Reiki. When I was studying Reiki, it was explained to me in a very modern definition of, we're the extension cord. Our client is on our table, and we're the extension cord that reaches up to the light and pulls it down. Well, I shouldn't say pulls it down, allows it to pass through us to our client. This is a very common belief throughout the world, seeking higher power to endow us, to imbue us with something greater than ourselves. So now that I've thoroughly jumbled multiple regions of the world together, we're actually going to read a list of what are the gifts that are enumerated or listed out in the Bible. So this is in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 4 through 11. It's a long one. I might take breaks in the middle to explicate some stuff. Starting in verse 4. Now there are diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are differences of administrations, but the same Lord. This is essentially saying, we believe there is one source of this divine power, but there are many methods of applying it. And there are diversities of operations, but it is the same God which worketh all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to every man to profit withal. So while there are many methods and operations of using spiritual gifts, they were given to us for the benefit of all of humanity, for all humankind. For to one it is given the spirit of the word of wisdom, to another the word of knowledge, by the same Spirit, to another faith, by the same Spirit, to another the gifts of healing, by the same Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another divers kinds of tongues, and to another the interpretation of tongues. But all these worketh that one and the selfsame Spirit, dividing to every man severally, as he will. So they broke down several types of gifts here. Corinthians, for context, is a letter that was written to the Corinthians. That's why it is called the first epistle of Paul, the apostle, to the Corinthians. He was in prison at this point, and so he was writing letters to all of the people who he had met throughout his travels, who he had taught, because they had questions, so he was answering their questions. So when we look at this, let's break down what some of those spiritual gifts are and how they are shown in various traditions around the world. At least the traditions I'm familiar with, because there is always more to learn. And there are so many different ways that these are interpreted by different cultures. The word of wisdom. This brings out to my mind Solomon, Confucius. many of the great philosophers throughout history. They were given a great ability to discern different outcomes based off of the information in front of them. That is what it means to be wise. To be able to look forward and go, that's not going to turn out so great. Word of knowledge, revelation, knowing. I've also heard this referred to as claircognizance. There are many different traditions of receiving knowledge through deity. Angelic messengers, dreams and portents, using divinatory tools such as tarot, runes, tea leaves. I know many Christians are going to be really mad that I'm including all of these things as gifts of knowledge, but I believe that there is one God. It's very simple in my mind. There is one source for all that is good, just like all that is bad comes from not that source. I was raised in a tradition that refers to that source as God, uppercase G. But there are other cultures that interpret that same source as multiple gods, which Christians use lowercase g for. But I don't believe that all other people were wrong. I believe that we all have our perceptions of the truth and what we believe and how we interpret that which we have learned, that which we have received. So another unpopular take of mine is that the different gods, lowercase g as Christians put it, or uppercase G with name, are titles or aspects of divinity. It is when divinity is interacting with a particular role towards humanity. Not that. And of course, when you start getting deeper into occultism, there are some that were very much just made up to manipulate and control people. So the way I distinguish between the two is, was it encouraging people to become better? Was it providing comfort and support? Or was it to control and dominate? If it was to control and dominate, that's a cult. If it was to improve and become a better person and seek peace and healing, then that's a true religion. Again, I know that take is going to piss off a lot of people, but it's how I operate. It's how I view life. Moving on. So, difference of the gift of wisdom, the gift of knowledge, the gift of faith. There's a well-known verse in the Book of Mormon that faith is believing in things which are not seen, which are true. That is faith. You don't need the empirical evidence to believe it. In many other denominations of Christianity, faith is power. Faith is the manifestation of your belief. You will find this in most pagan traditions as well. Actually, most religions have some aspect of faith, or the building of your belief and your personal power. There are too many variations to really get into here. That could be its own topic for a video. Discernment of spirits. Being able to identify, who is this person who has come to talk to me? Which aspect of divinity is talking to me? Is this an animal? Is it a person? Is it a place? That all falls under the discernment of spirits. Is this spirit telling me the truth? also falls under discernment of spirits. The gift of healing. This is very common throughout the world, through a wide variety of methods. In the Latter-day Saint faith, they preach of healing by the laying on of hands after an anointment of oil that has been consecrated for the healing of the sick and afflicted. In a lot of other Christian faiths, they still have the laying on of hands, but not necessarily the anointment of oil. In Reiki, there is still the laying on of hands, but it is connecting to the source of light and truth, of the energy that animates the human body, technically animates all living things, of chi or ki, depending on which language you're drawing the word from. All of this plays into itself, into each other. Prophecy. This one is often misunderstood. This is not necessarily fortune telling, because fortune telling is this specific person. What is going to happen to you? Do you have good prospects or bad prospects? Prophecy is, this applies to a large group of people. For example, prophecies have existed in really every culture. Warnings of natural disaster, signs to look for, warnings of spiritual disaster, signs to look for. That is what prophecy is. Speaking in tongues. This one causes issues a lot. Many different Christian denominations have wildly different interpretations of this gift. What I was taught growing up is that the gift of tongues is being able to communicate with others even if you do not know that language. But for it to be truly the gift of tongues, that means someone else has to be capable of interpreting it. That goes hand in hand with the interpretation of tongues, which is the next gift in this list. There are other denominations that speak of the gift of tongues as almost its own language, where they start speaking in a way where there are no discernible language. There's sound, there's movement, there is being overcome by the Spirit, but not necessarily interpretation. I have not experienced this myself. I know that others swear by it. For me, it has, from my personal experience, I experienced the gift of tongues when I was in Argentina as a missionary. There were times where I could speak so eloquently because that's what God wanted to have happen. And there were other times where I sounded like an idiot because it was not as integral that I be precise. And I could tell the difference. Even to this day, I could speak Spanish. I can understand far more Spanish than I speak. I would be considered conversational if we're breaking down my language. Because there are so many topics that I just never had a reason to learn the vocabulary of. So if we're talking about scripture, if we're talking about health, if we're talking about food, I have plenty of words. You want to talk about computer science? I'm going to need a dictionary. But there were times where I understood everything. That was a gift. That was a spiritual gift. So that's enumerated all of those things. Scriptural kind of running all over the place in this video. If you have questions or comments or additional insight to add, because this is a huge topic, and I know maybe this much out of the entirety of world's knowledge, actually more like this much. So let's leverage the internet. Let's leverage our personal experiences and share together and grow together. And if you like this type of content, my kind of just talking at the camera, let me know. Everyone's welcome here. I love learning. I love the opportunity for growth. And so, until next time, walk in the light.